concentrating, I'm sorry. We are concentrating on mobility, urban mobility, and our first presenter is Dr. Paul Schoenfeld and Mr. Fei Wu from University of Maryland, College Park, as part of UMEC Urban Mobility and Equity Center. Thank you, and please start.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. This presentation that we have today is based on the master's thesis of Mr. Fei Wu, who's now a PhD student at the University of Maryland. So he was working on optimizing the phase development of a rail transit line, trying to determine in how many stations at a time and their corresponding links to add based on various factors that he discussed, such as the evolution of the demand and the economies of scale of adding multiple components of the route together. His algorithm is designed to optimize the development of essentially a radial line that passes through the central business district of a city and extends radially in both directions. So he's trying to determine when is the right time to add another set of stations at either end of the route. And I think his work is interesting for several reasons. First of all, this is a problem that has not been found in the literature on the phase development of a two-directional rail line. By the way, Fei hopes to extend this eventually into a network model, and not just for railroads, but for the feeding bus routes that would work in conjunction with a rail network. He is optimizing net benefits rather than just minimizing costs. He is considering in his budget constraints, not only the external subsidies, but the possible fraction of revenues from fares that could be used to contribute to the development of rail line extensions. And we are fairly, we think this is an interesting topic to work on. So Fei, are you ready to go ahead?
Yeah.
Go ahead, please. Thank you.
So here are the contents of my presentation today. And we can first go to the introduction of our study. So the background of our study is like this. Major cities, there are some rapid transit systems serving the basic commuting corridors, and they can work for relieving the congestions. While there are new links, when there are new links and stations available for passengers, they can reduce the travel time of passengers, but they also impose substantial costs like the maintenance and construction. So it will be challenging to design an affordable development plan for operators while considering different various budget constraints internally or externally. We also need to note that as there are new stations and links completed, the passenger ridership will redistribute within the operating network. This will also increase the total user benefits while also increasing cost of users and suppliers. While the earlier extension may have a value of satisfying travel demand, it also has some constraints from budget, and the discounting of costs will also favor delaying the extensions instead. For these reasons, it will be desirable to optimize a phased development plan for a rail transit line or network. So in our study, the objective is to determine what links and stations should be completed in groups and at what times in order to maximize the net present value of the system, which not only includes a cost not only consider the cost of users and operators, but also include the consumer surplus and collected fares from users. So in our study, we proposed a novel optimization model for the development of a rail transit line in phases. We have the following features, like there are one-directional and two-directional extension for this problem. And we consider the elasticity of demand for calculating the consumer surplus and also the collected fares and the actual demand of passengers. The budget constraints is not only from the external supply, but also from the collective fares. For one and two directional extension, we use different heuristic methods for optimizing the extension plans. So we demonstrate the model with some synthetical numerical cases. We also conduct some sensitivity analysis of results to some parameters. As we reviewed the previous literature, we found that most previous studies on the design and optimization of rail transit systems are focusing on timetabling, coordination with other systems like feeder buses, and the alignment and network design. So our scope of study are most relevant to the third one, which is the design of a network. So these are the most common features of the phase development of rail transit system. The features include timings of improvements for pre-designed system, and we need to determine the completion time of the different components in the system as decision variables. We need to consider the growing travel demand that may be affected by the evolving characteristic of the system. We also consider an objective function, which is evaluated and discounted over an analysis period. So right now, they're finding only a few studies published for this problem. So they're listed like these things. As you can see, most of these studies are considering the they're considering the minimization of overcost, and also the problem structure as like mostly like the bi-level ones. So we can see that in the first two models, all the possible sequences all the possible sequences of line extensions are allowed, but the analysis period is discretized. While at the model by Pang et al. In 2019, there is some continuous time in the analysis period, but the completion groups of links and stations are predetermined. So these studies have some limitations in the number of possible values of completion times or the number of feasible sequences of the station completion. So we may try overcome these limitations in our study with continuously formulated time, and also we can optimize the extension plans without predetermining the grouping of completing the stations and links. So here are the formulation for the one direction extension. So as you can see in this graph, there are some existing stations in the segment from one end, and then there are some planned segments to be completed in the future. As you can see there, this line is now extended in only one extension, and then we're trying to complete all these part of these stations in the following T years, which is the analysis period or the evaluation period. So there are some completion times for these stations denoted as TK, and if we allow TK equals to big T, then the corresponding station is not to be completed within the analysis period. We also assuming that when we're extending the line, we need to ensure the line's continuity. Okay, so here we determine, here we denote the time interval during which there are K planned stations will be in operation as phase K. So we have a duration which is TK plus 1 minus TK. So if there are two or more stations completed together, some periods will have some phases will have a duration of 0. So here we show the formulation for computing the impedance for passengers, the actual demand of passengers and consumer surplus. We first assume that there is a potential demand for each OD pair, and so this number is for the largest hour passenger flow at zero travel time and 0 fare. So for computing the impedance for passenger, we include the fare, the in-vehicle time, the cost from in-vehicle time, and also the cost from average waiting time. We're assuming that the average waiting time for passengers in OD pair is half of the headway of these trains. For the demand, we also have an annual growth rate, which is G in each year, G% in a year. So in vehicle time, we are considering the possible use of multiple transit modes. So we have the speed for average speed for a train, and also an average speed for alternative modes to rail. And then with the calculated total impedance, with the impedance, we can calculate the actual demand for each OD pair based on the potential demand, the maximum acceptable impedance for passengers, and also the actual impedance of passengers. As you can see from this graph, we are using a linear demand function, which we are assuming that the ridership will be zero when the actual impedance is at the maximum acceptable impedance, and as the actual impedance decreases, the actual ridership for an OD pair will linearly increase until when the impedance is zero, the actual ridership will reach the potential ridership. So as the shaded area, as you can see in the shaded area, this triangle marks the consumer surplus, while there is a rectangle marking the total fare to be collected for this fraction of passengers for this OD pair I to J. The user's time cost is also marked with the in-vehicle time and waiting time. So we are also considering the growth of demand, and we use the midpoint of period phase K as the approximate average hourly for calculating the approximate hourly collective consumer surplus and collective fare for the phase K. So okay, so here we are showing how we are determining the maximum allowable headway for trains. So we have the train capacity and the actual demand calculated as shown above. So so the maximum allowable headway is determined by the peak hourly passenger flow at the end of phase K. And we are also determining, we first need to determine the peak hourly flow for the phase K, which is given by the maximum of the hourly flow through each link in each in operation link in phase K. For determining the actual determining the headway for each link, we have this equation, which is given by this, like h headway times the actual flow times the peak hour factor equals to a capacity of the train. After rewriting this, we obtain a quadratic equation with respect to the maximum allowable headway for this for the specific link I. So if this inequality is satisfied, we can use the smaller root of this quadratic equation, from which we can obtain the maximum allowable headway for one direction through the link I. Otherwise, if this inequality is not satisfied, we use the headway that maximizes the utilization of train capacity. So after solving each maximum allowable headway for the passenger flow through one direction, and through each link, we can then collect these results and then obtain the maximum allowable headway for the whole line in a specific phase K. So we can then determine the required number of trains during phase K using the round trip time during this phase. So as for computing different components in the net present value for this extension plan, we are using the approximation method. For each phase, there is a duration from tk to tk plus 1, as shown in the left figure. While when the discount rate and the growth rate of demand is relatively small, we can use the midpoint of this phase and use the midpoint for calculating the approximate average hourly consumer surplus during phase K. So the approximate hourly average for the approximate hourly average for the present value of consumer surplus is given by this equation. So we also multiply this approximate average use with the H, which is the total hours of operation in a year. Okay. Oh, one more thing. The figure in the right show how we are discounting the total consumer surplus from the future time to the present time. So we are similarly determining the approximate present value of total collective fare in the phase K, and also the total operation cost and maintenance cost occurred during the phase K. As for the initial cost of additional trains, we were using the number of total trains in phase K determined above using the maximum allowable headway. So for the construction cost in phase K, we are assuming that they incur at the completion of new links and stations. So the construction costs include station construction cost, the line construction cost, as well as the total cost of terminal facilities. So in each extension, there will be incurrence of the terminal facilities, and it will be pretty much predictable that as a higher cost of facilities are imposed for the terminals, there will be more stations to be completed in groups in the optimized extension plans. So we are also using two binary variables for calculating the construction cost.
I think we need to move faster.
Okay. So here are how we compute the total present value of supplier costs and also the overall net present value for the line. For determining the completion times, we are using the following constraints for available budget. In the available budget, we are including the internal supply of the budget, which is the collective part of collective fares, and also the external supply that's which is assumed to be linearly increasing each year. So as for the two-direction extension, most settings are similar from the one-direction extension, while we are determining the temporary ends of this of different phases in the extension plan using using a genetic algorithm from an upper level. So we are still assuming that we need to ensure the continuity of the line during the extension. We are also assuming stations at different ends cannot be completed together. And we are also and from an external for an extension plan given by a genetic algorithm, we also numerically find the we numerically find the completion times for each potential step as soon as the available budget becomes sufficient for extension. The stations and links for the corresponding extension step will be completed. However, if some numerically determined completion time exceeds the duration of analysis period, then then we assume that these stations and links will not be completed, and the corresponding extension step will not be realized in the analysis period. So for the two-direction extension, some formulation is modified. So here are the modified calculation for the total impedance for each OD pair of passengers, and also the in-vehicle cost and in-vehicle time for these passengers. We're also using a set of OD pairs that is defined for how the passengers will use the rail transit in different phases K. So using this set, we are modifying the calculation for actual passenger flows through each link in each direction. And we are also modifying how we determine the maximum allowable headway based on these actual demand of passengers. So for the two-direction extension, the constraint of available budgets becomes binding for determining the completion time of extension step. So in this two-direction extension, we first, using this constraint, we first determine the completion time of the first phase, and then to the following phases. Right. So here we are coming to the solution method for optimizing the extension. So as for the one direction extension, we use the differential evolution methods proposed by Storin and Price in 1997. So this is for the small size numerical case in the one direction extension. We use this because the objective function, which is the net present value, is not continuous throughout the feasible solution space because we use some binary variables. So here is a framework for the differential evolution where we may use some initialized solution vector and then generate a mutant vector from the target for a target vector, and then some trial vector is generated between the mutant and target vector. The evolution method checks if the trial vector improves objective function, and then it iterates until the vectors may reach the relative tolerance for convergence. Well, for this two-direction extension, we are using a customized genetic algorithm because the differential evolution becomes pretty much inefficient for this much larger problem. Because for the two-direction extension, we are having a much larger number of possible extension plans. So here is a general framework for the customized genetic algorithm. And then the first step for this is to generate an initialized population. In a population, there are multiple, a specific number of chromosomes. So each chromosome actually denotes a possible extension plan for this two-directional problem. So as you can see, this is a structure for the chromosome where the first row marks the station IDs to be extended sequentially, and the row 2 marks whether the stations need to be completed together in one step. So as you can see, in the example, the station 3 and 2 are completed in one step. The stations 8, 9, and 10 are completed in one step. After initializing population, we need to evaluate each fitness value of each chromosome. So it first decodes the chromosome into different extension steps, and then it's the net present value. The completion time is first determined for each step, and then the net present value is calculated for this chromosome. The fitness value for the chromosome is simply the net present value of corresponding extension plan. So using these fitness values, we can select the parents from these chromosomes. We are using a ranking-based selection probabilities for choosing the parents, because if the probability for selecting these chromosomes is purely based on ranking, then these probabilities will not be influenced by the absolute differences of these fitness values, which can pose a relatively stable selection pressure for these chromosomes.
I think you need to move faster.
So here are how we do the crossover for these chromosomes, and then here are how we do the mutation for these chromosomes using some possible moves and some adjustments for the invisible chromosomes. Here we are showing the numerical results for the one direction extension. So here are the parameters we set for this problem, and then here we show the computation time using the differential evolution for the one direction extension. So here we are showing the computation time, and then this is the net present value for the optimized solution, while the completion times for these steps are listed. So in this case, the station 9 is not completed within the analysis period, while station 5 to 8 are completed in these times. When we are examining the effects of terminal cost and the length of analysis period, we found that when, as we expected, when there is a much larger terminal cost, the stations to be completed in one time in the optimized solution becomes more, as we can see in the dotted line for the 18 times for a larger terminal cost and a longer analysis period.
By terminal cost, Fei means a temporary turnback station at the temporary end of the line, rather than the cost for each station. Keep going.
So when the terminal cost is smaller, the staircase looks like this, while when the terminal cost is larger, it becomes only 2 extension steps, as shown in this line. So in the sensitivity analysis, we choose some parameters for comparing the sensitivity of results to these parameters, and we change each parameter from the base value and with other conditions unchanged. Then we can compare the change of optimized net present value as to these changes of parameters. So we can see that the net present value is rather sensitive to the hourly potential demand as well as the unit value of in-vehicle time, while we also compare the last completion time of station 8 in response to these parameters. So we found that the completion time is most sensitive to the construction cost of links and stations, and also to the hourly potential demand, the external budget supply, and the fraction of value for reinvestment for construction. For the 2-direction extension, we have the numerical case with 4 existing stations and 8 planned stations at each end, and the demand matrix is like this. When we are using the genetic algorithm, we have the following computation time, and the optimized extension plans are listed. So as you can see, we have the chromosome, and we denote this chromosome as the extension plan with 9 potential steps. And for these steps, we also have the completion times, and the resulting total net present value. We also examined the effect of terminal cost on the optimized extension plan for two directions. So as is shown clearly, with a higher terminal cost, there are more stations to be completed in groups, and there are fewer extension steps throughout the analysis period. As you can see, with the higher terminal cost and the delayed completion of these stations, the present value becomes lower. We also checked the effectiveness of this customized genetic algorithm with the statistical test, where we randomly sampled 50,000 chromosomes from all possible permutations of the chromosomes, and then we plotted out the histograms for the fitness values in each for each terminal cost values. Although none of these distributions distributions can be generalized with some existing modes of distributions, we found that none of these highest values, fitness values, can exceed that from the optimized chromosome through the genetic algorithm. So this one actually shows strong evidence for near optimality of the heuristic solution. Well, we need to note one thing, that in practice, the uncertainties in the input parameters like the demand level, the growth rates, and the estimated value of time can outweigh the possible optimality gap of solution from the genetic algorithm. So we also examined the possible effect from the length, the duration of analysis period. So as you can see, a shorter analysis period can decrease the fraction of completion of these optimized plans. Well, it seems that the later steps in the optimized plan tend to be smaller steps. So we also compare the sensitivity of results to these selected parameters, and then we listed the corresponding extension plans, optimized extension plans, and the net present values, and also the changes in the final completion time. So in the two-direction version, the net present value is still rather sensitive to the demand level and the estimated value of time in the vehicles. While for the final completion time, it is also sensitive to these parameters, because the internal flow of budget from the collective fares are significantly impacted by these two factors too. We also, when we compare the changes in these net present values, we can see that the changes of net present values are quite related to these changes in the corresponding extension plans. So here we are concluding our study with the following remarks. We are obtaining the optimized extension plans using some heuristic methods for both versions of a problem. And then we found that the customized genetic algorithm is suitable for the two-directional plan. And it also seems that the terminal, as the terminal cost increases, there are the joint completion of multiple stations and links is favored. And the decision makers should be very careful in determining the value of users in vehicle time as well as the future potential demand before making extension plans, especially when they intend to maximize the net present value of the extension plan. The results and formulations shown above are mostly based on the master's thesis last year, while we also have some more improvements since the master thesis, like we are using when the components of net present value are computed, we are using the integration of over time instead of approximation methods. We're separating the construction period for determining the completion time we are separating this construction period from the analysis period. We also consider the uncertainty of the growth rates of demand. And we also use some minimum allowable headway for operation safety while determining the optimized extension plans. So future improvements in our model includes the following things, like, and we may consider how to optimize the fare headways train capacities. Second, we may add some features for the demand, such as maybe the faster growth due to new completion of stations. Third, we may consider the integer fleet sizes. And we may also consider the cyclic operations, uncertainty of other factors like budget, as well as the future extension of this model to a network. So here are the references for our study, and then that's all for my presentation for this model. Any questions?
Okay, well, thank you very much, and we'd be very glad to get questions and comments from the audience. This work has been reviewed by Transportation Research Part B, and we got a few suggestions for improving the model, which we have. So we're about ready to resend it. Anyway, we hope to keep working on developing the models to eventually extend it to multimodal networks. But right now it's still for a single rail line.
Great work, thank you so much. Any questions? No questions? Okay.
If anybody thinks of questions after today, you also have our contact information, so we're glad to try to answer them later. But yeah, if anyone has questions now, that would be even better. If not, we could take a break.
Yes, thank you so much, Faye and Dr. Schoenfeld, for your great presentation. We're gonna have like a 5-minute break, and we're gonna come back for the next presentation.